Day 725 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 403,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additionally astounding figure of 1,290 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 11 tanks, a massive 34 APVs, 24 artillery, and one more military jet, which happened around 24 hours ago now, right at the time when I was recording the previous day's update. So we'll head back across to the map now today, and we'll take a peek at that latest aviation loss development, as Ukrainian Defense Forces shot down another Su-34 on the Eastern Front, making for a total of 4 jets destroyed in the minuscule period of 48 hours. And the tally included 1 Su-35 jet and 3 Su-34s. So this event likely once again resulted from a Patriot air defense complex stationed in the Donbass, utilizing its PAC-2 missiles, which contain a range of about 165 kilometers. Now in contrast, take the recent loss of Avdiivka, for example, where Russia was throwing everything they had into that region, including their air-launched precision glide munitions with a range of about 50 kilometers only, which makes things quite problematic for Russian aviation support on the front. And Russia really doesn't have anything else with precision at short range to use in this war when it comes to the front lines specifically, apart from those mentioned 50-kilometer Fab 250 or Fab 500 glide munitions. So there it is, at roughly $50 million apiece, making for a $200 million loss for Russia in the space of just 48 hours, which is not even a record by any recent Russian loss standard whatsoever in terms of cents and dollars. But more importantly for Russia, it's the loss of critical platforms for which they don't have the industrial capacity to replace, or even the technology to build back up, due to Russia's long-standing mistake of developing a very strong reliance on Western technology, which of course has since been sanctioned by much of the international community. And you would think that after losing 3 aircraft the day before, would make Russia stop for a while. But no, that would require consideration. Plus, this is the overarching Russian military mindset we see here. Or, in other words, Russia will forcefully put a stop to Ukraine, or Ukraine will forcefully put a stop to Russia. And that's the dynamic we're dealing with here. The only difference is, if Russia lays down their arms tomorrow, they'll still exist. But if Ukraine lays down their arms tomorrow, then they cease to exist. Then we'll move a bit further south as Russia settles into its new crib in Avdiivka. Well, less of a crib, more of a desolate wasteland, just largely consisting of rubble. But even then, they thought they'd keep going after that capture. However, were absolutely obliterated in Lasto-Shekina, to the west of the town, where Russian troops reported that they were under heavy fire with all kinds of means from the Ukrainians. And reason being, some months ago now, the AFU was in the process of setting up new fallback defensive positions that run somewhat along this new contact point, and they've been setting these up going all the way north to Novobatmukivka, as they don't let Russians just waltz on down roughly about 65 kilometers or about 40 miles to reach the edge of the Donbass, which makes this a good time to put captures and landmass into perspective, because Russia needs to capture at least another 10,000 square kilometers, or about 4,000 square miles, to get the rest of the Donetsk Oblast, which is a figure that obviously dwarfs the 36 square kilometers from Russia's most recent advance in Avdiivka, which they achieved due to a withdrawal as opposed to fierce opposition. Because we're dealing with 2 very different armies here. One seeks to preserve the lives of their soldiers, and the other literally seeks to expend them. And hey, since that's the game that Russia plays and can currently sustain, then the AFU is ultimately responsive to the rules of engagement by setting up a veritable meat grinder on the battlefield instead. And you might have heard the typical military personnel loss ratio we often hear about that is normally 1 to 8 in Ukraine's favor, which has actually ended up here being about 1 to 13 in Avdiivka, favoring Ukraine, of course. But more on that shortly in the video. Then, somewhere in the east, 2 Russian T-80 MBTs, or main battle tanks, and an MTLB, which is a 1970s Soviet armoured fighting vehicle, were recently destroyed on the outskirts of, in fact, this was quite up the north in Sinkivka, and made a reality by Ukraine's 30th Mechanized Brigade. Then moving across on the map, as fighting has been taking place on the edges of the trenches and fortifications south of Robotyne. And so far, Russian forces don't seem to be able to gain a foothold yet. And today, another attack was repulsed, for instance, west of Robotyne and coming from Kapani. Russians attacked in a small column, very small column. Both of their BMPs were destroyed in that unusual engagement. And then west of Verbova, the grey zone has been widened due to Russian attacks, but we're waiting for a map update here. Then, new footage and imagery emerged from yesterday's failed Russian attack on Robotyne, with 18 pieces of equipment, of which at least 3 being tanks and several BMPs were destroyed with the help of ATGM fire and regular artillery mortar fire and cluster munitions from the AFU. But the most telling thing with this failed onslaught was the usage of T-55 tanks, which we already know Russia has been forced to pull out from old Soviet stockpiles. But a couple of things to note here. Firstly, devoid of upgrades, such as ERA contact bricks, but it also proves that the Russian claim to use these old vehicles as just field artillery was a lie. Instead, they're using them as frontline assault MBTs, which are completely outdated for the task at hand. Then we'll head across to some news for today. So, German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall has entered into a partnership with a Ukrainian firm to produce artillery shells with Ukraine, a development announced at the Munich Security Conference last weekend. This collaboration, which sees Rheinmetall taking a majority stake, aims to bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities by increasing the domestic production of crucial artillery ammunition, including the 155mm caliber rounds that are essential for the Western artillery systems currently in use by Ukraine. And this step is particularly noteworthy as Ukraine works to overcome delays in military support and seeks to become more self-reliant in its defense efforts by localizing weapons production. Then in some more news, in a significant shift in European security dynamics, Ukraine is strategically securing individual security agreements with countries like France, Germany, the UK, the US, and others amid its ongoing conflict with Russia, which is to work alongside the existing form of the traditional collective security measures through the EU and NATO nations. And so this approach, most recently exemplified by France's impending security guarantee accord with Ukraine, is set to provide tailored support, including military assistance specifically aimed at bolstering Ukraine's defenses against Russian aggression. So the benefits to setting up these types of smaller one-on-one bilateral agreement approaches are so that it gives the advantage of focusing on meeting Ukraine's immediate security needs, albeit on a smaller but faster scale than that of the larger collective security agreements that I've just mentioned, which, as we've seen on many fronts, is generally a slower process. And as for a bit of history, the UK was the first to sign such an agreement for a term of 10 years. And currently, Ukraine is in the process of negotiating security agreements with other nations such as Italy, Canada, Poland, Denmark, to name but a few. Then moving across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, as following the recent burn rate Russia experienced from its capture of Avdiivka, there are many Telegram channels from Russians seeking to find their family members post-capture. Now, some unofficial Russian sources stated that Russia lost about 30,000 or so men in the town, but Russian estimates tend to always be on the very low end, with other estimates, including wounded, being anywhere between 90 to 120,000. And take this Telegram channel and message within the channel, for example. One contact is looking for 3 separate people in their family: a father, a brother, and a son. That's just sheer insanity of an outcome. Then moving across to a funny to round it all off today, guys, and a 5-second funny because I'm really out of time today. So with this one, I'll firstly say there's really no consistency with Russia, even at the highest levels, because most recently Russia's top propagandist Solovyov seemed to be coming to terms with Russian imperialistic ambitions, and not to be ashamed of them. Which is only made more ridiculous by the fact that Uncle Solly here and the Kremlin at large have been on the horn since the invasion of Ukraine, instead blaming the West for their imperialistic ambitions. I mean, seriously, can you imagine being a Russian that watches the incoherent babble of Russian state media on a daily basis? You'd almost need to have a notepad by the side of your armchair as you watch the TV, checking what's the latest accepted narrative, and more importantly, what you can't have an opinion on. What a headspin. So that's it for today, guys. A little bit quicker there, like I said, just is the way that it is. Hopefully back to more of a regular schedule this week. But yeah, I'll be back in tomorrow. And yeah, thanks again for all of your support, your likes, your comments. Can't thank you enough, guys. Thanks so much. And I do hope to see all of you guys there on the next one. Cheers.